and companion in labor, and fellow soldier, but your messenger, that he ministered to my wants. For he longed after you all, and was full of heaviness, because that ye had heard that he had been sick. For indeed he was sick, nigh unto death, but God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. I sent him therefore the more carefully, that, when ye see him again, ye may rejoice, and that I may be less sorrowful. Receive him therefore in the Lord with all gladness, and hold such in reputation, because for the work of Christ he was nigh unto death, not regarding his life, to supply your lack of service toward me. In the introduction on page 62, he makes the point that God does not require of us more than we are able to do. If somebody would turn to Matthew chapter 25, verse 15. Matthew 25, verse 15. Read that for us.
And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability, and immediately he went on a journey.
While the number is different, what is the same about each of these three men?
They each had some amount of talent.
All right. They were given according to their ability to use. Whatever the distinction was, the Lord knew each of them individually and was able to present to one 5, another 2, and to another 1. All of us are different in our abilities, the things that we do. Now, sometimes we are like the 1 talent and we hide what we're able to do. Keep in mind that the use of the word talent here doesn't mean our ability. It is a sum of wealth, whether silver or gold. It came in different forms, but they were to use it. And so each of these individuals, the Lord knew what they could handle and what they were able to do. And that's much what he's trying to describe here, both with regards to Paul being in prison. His abilities are limited to some degree. But then he talks about Timothy and what he's able to do, and then also Epaphroditus. And each of us honestly need to look into that mirror of God's Word and see what we're able to do. And that's the purpose of this lesson, that as last week he said, hold forth the word of light, that now we see examples of individuals who are doing that very thing. Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16 talk about that we are the light of the world. We have something to offer, both by example and by word. We teach in both of those areas. So we need to be thankful that God has said, you sit back and don't do anything. You let others do all the work. You just wait around and do nothing. But God puts all of us to work regardless of what amount of ability or how we have been blessed, that we're to use those things. So in the middle of the first paragraph, he says, when we closely examine Paul's letter to the Philippians, we find the apostle reminding the audience about this fact. Philippians 1:27 has probably been used in most of the lessons so far. King James says, let your manner of life, that is your conduct, the way that you're living, be such as becometh the gospel of Christ. So there is a pattern or something that is to rule our lives to teach us how to let that light shine. What is the opposite of letting our light shine in Matthew chapter 5? Hiding it under a bushel. It's not going to do a whole lot of good. I have no idea why it's taking so long, but this unit over here still isn't completely fixed. It runs, but it doesn't do everything that it's supposed to. So Again, we have a cold side for those who like it colder and a little bit warmer side. But the fact is that this machine over here is supposed to be doing more than it is. What about our lives? Are we, in a sense, running at full capacity? Or are we going to do the work when we're called upon doing it, or the thermostat is adjusted? Do we kick in and do what we're supposed to do? Or because of our lack of work, lack of something being wrong in our lives, do we fall short? And so Paul wants us to conduct our lives and to live in such a way. Beginning of the second paragraph in the introduction, he says, because Paul's demands must be obeyed. He doesn't leave it up to a matter of opinion. Well, you go through the buffet line and you pick and choose what you want to, or you visit Burger King and you have it your way. He says all of God's commands are those things that we ought to be observant of, those things that we ought to be concerned about. He says we must learn His expectations, what He wants them to do. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 7. 2 Timothy 3, verse 7.
Ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth.
It usually isn't a problem. For most of the people in our class, we've been Christians a good number of years. And so it isn't a problem that we don't know the truth. We may just not want to make the application. We know that it's necessary, part of obeying God, to assemble ourselves with the saints. We know what God requires of us when we worship. We know that moms and dads have the responsibility of bringing their children up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. We know that we're to be evangelistic. And so in a sense, it's not necessary for us to learn those lessons over and over or have somebody tell us about them. But he says of these individuals that they're just continuing to learn over and over. But in a sense, they never put it into practice. They never come to a knowledge of the truth to say, hey, that applies to me. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. Rather than pointing the finger at someone else and say, well, they ought to do better at that. So in the introduction, he's giving us the necessity of not just learning, being able to win trivia on Bible facts, but to understand that we have to make the application, to put it into practice. And so in the following two sections, he gives us, first of all, Timothy as an example, and then moves on to Epaphroditus. And so some of it we'll look at within the workbook, and some of it we'll use your wisdom to make the application as far as through the text. Jeremy?
Before we shift gears, I'm not really sure how to ask this question right, so I'm just going to try anyway. We're talking about doing according to our ability. Ability can and often does change.
Mm-hmm.
How do we as Christians know where that line is between what we can do and what we should do? Does
Well,
that make sense?
Well, in a tangible aspect, when you look at Matthew 25, or the 5, the 2, and the 1, we know that these men changed, at least the 5 and the 2, well, even the 1 did as well, both from a positive and negative standpoint. The 5 increased by 5, so he knew that he had more, 2 than the 1 lost. And so we know that from at least that aspect that they understood there was a change. And that can be true spiritually as well. But normally that takes trying to see. Can I do this? You may not believe this. When I got out of the military, I went to a small school called Southern Union in Wadley, Alabama. When I sat down with the counselor, or I decided probably on my own, I did everything in the world to stay out of a speech class. I didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't want to be up before anybody. I didn't want to have impromptu speeches. I didn't want anything. Now you may say, well, there's a reason behind it. It shows. Hopefully not. When I went to the Memphis School of Preaching, we had individuals who had very seldom stood up before a group of people. And so in chapel, the students would give speeches. It came time for this one man to get up and talk. You could tell how visibly shaken he was. He got up to the podium. He sort of grasped it with both hands. And then you could see his face. It popped out with sweat. I don't know that he got more than 2 or 3 sentences out before he said, I can't do it. And so for the answer is usually it takes for us by our ability that there is a change. I know preachers, at least 2 of them, who at times had problems with their voice. Their ability changed because the doctor said, you don't need to talk right now. And so they carried around a pen and a paper. They were asked a question, they would have to write it down and hand it. Well, their ability changed for a while. And so that can be true with us both positively and negatively. Somebody may lose a job. Their financial ability has changed. Other side of it, they may get a promotion, get a raise, their financial ability's changed. Usually it's something that we can measure. I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Not as good as the question.
Okay. Anything before we get into looking at each of these? All right, first of all, Timothy. He brings up the background of where we come in or Paul comes in contact with him. And where is that? Where does Paul first meet Timothy? Lystra, Acts chapter 16. And he points out the fact that Timothy came from a divided family. Now, usually you say divided family around here, and people have a car tag that usually has Alabama or Auburn on one side and a car tag on the other side, the other team. I imagine every state's that way, whether it's Georgia, Georgia Tech, something along that line. But here you have a mother who is a Christian. You have a father who is a Gentile. And by implication, he's not. we might say, well, that's a hard family to grow up in. And probably would be. But we also know from 2 Timothy 1:5 that Lois and Eunice were very involved in teaching Timothy. They gave him the information that he needed according to chapter 3 of that same book, 15, of what to do to be saved. He would know the Holy Scriptures, make him wise unto salvation. And so we might think Timothy's gotten off to a rocky start, but Paul is going to use opportunities to increase his ability, to let him be that light. So as we look at the text again, the first part, verses 19 through see how far it goes. Through 24. Talks about Timothy as far as these things are concerned. But Timothy is wanting this young evangelist not to be satisfied with what he's done, or to even be one thing when he's with Paul and another when he's not. He's got to continue to live that faithful life. The second paragraph on page 63, he says, because of Timothy's good reputation, Paul wanted him to join the team, nevertheless to avoid controversy. Paul does something that we might think is a little odd, because later about Titus, it's not the same thing. He has him circumcised because of being around the Jews so much. And normally, the Jewish lineage passes through the mother, and so he would still be considered a Jew nationally. He's a Christian spiritually, but he does this to remove any kind of hindrance that might be there. So the middle of this paragraph, he says, Paul considered it to be an expedient to their future success, especially when working among the Jews. He points out the passage from 1 Corinthians 9. The last paragraph on this, he says, of all men Paul befriended and mentored during his lifetime, by his own words, Timothy seems to stand out as far as taking him under his wing, trying to help him in the ways that he can. How did he describe Timothy, both in 1 and 2 Timothy? All right. He described him as a son spiritually. He's got a physical father, but Paul is now having a great influence over him. People come from a variety of backgrounds. My parents divorced when I was an early teen. My father had very little influence in our family. He was in the military, so a lot of the time he was gone in my earlier years. Then he was gone physically because he removed himself. And so I don't look up to him as Timothy would to Paul. We had our men's class yesterday, and Jimmy was bringing up the fact about who had some great influence on you. For myself, it would probably be my wife's father. Would have the greater spiritual influence on my life. But here is Timothy being shown this great treatment by Paul. Now, We know in the first missionary trip that Paul takes, what young man decides to turn back? I think I'm hearing you. John Mark? It doesn't give us any reason why, whether he was homesick or the trip got too rough, whatever the case may be. But he decided, I'm going back. And Paul said that he didn't want to take him with him. Things changed later on because Colossians chapter 4, he talks about how John Mark is profitable for the ministry. So he didn't give up on him. He just thought it was best not to use him at that time. And so we have this overriding principle about being light. How would you say, and you don't have to answer anything according to the book, how would you say that Timothy follows this principle of being light?
Sharing the message of the gospel.
He's going to continue to teach the gospel. He's described in 1 Timothy 4:12 as being young, but he's also told to continue. Paul has passed upon him some spiritual gift, and he says, don't neglect it. But he says, meditate upon the word. 1 Timothy 4, verse 16 would go along with what Kyle brought up. 1 Timothy 4, verse 16.
Take heed to yourself and to the doctrine, continuing them. For in doing so, this will save both yourself and those who hear you.
All right. So he's got to continue on. Even though Paul is now in prison, separated him for this period of time, Timothy still has to continue on. Can you think of anything else?
Gary, when you say that about continuing on as light, I think about, we've all had probably a place in our life where we've had a flashlight we've relied on and then it goes off, right? The battery dies. I don't spend as much time in crawl spaces and attics as I used to, but I still get to do that on occasion as part of my job. And I was in a particularly dark, nasty crawl space pretty far down in there one time, and my flashlight that I thought I could count on went off. That's not a fun situation to be in.
Right.
It would have been very easy for Timothy, for Epaphroditus, for a lot of these men that Paul talks about, and he mentioned some that did. Their light turned off. They gave up. They flickered out, whatever it was. But Timothy clearly shows that he has that stick with it. It continues to shine the light and doesn't give up.
I appreciate the fact that you brought that up because I probably have more flashlights that don't work than do. Probably some of it because of the cost of batteries, and it's sometimes cheaper just to go and buy another one. But when you talk about lights, how are flashlights or bulbs, how are they measured as far as brightness? Lumens. I guess that's probably some Latin term. Yes, sir.
I was waving away at that. I'm sorry.
Well, you're supposed to take him in and then spit him out. And so we know that the less number of lumens, the less light it's going to give off. And then you can have bright lights that are higher lumens. And that probably applies some to our several abilities as far as what we do. And then there are those that, you put in a fresh battery or you plug it into the USB and it charges up. To start with, it's great, works fine. talking to Ricky and Cindy as far as being gone, and they said, well, next time you ought to go visit some caves. And I said, I don't know if I want to go into any caves. David Howard used to go into caves quite a bit, and you always want to make sure that you have your equipment because it gets dark in caves. And so Timothy is that light. More specifically, as far as the example of Timothy, it's probably found in 1 Timothy 4, verse 12, if somebody would read.
Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example to believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity.
So he's telling him, let your light shine in these areas. Now, there are always going to be the people who speak against Christians. But Timothy is being told, you've got an example, and you need to know, regardless of what people say, don't let them despise you. You continue to let your light shine. You continue to still have that faithful life in these different areas. And that's true for each of us, that we need to continue in all of these areas to let our light shine. Because Paul is very commending here of Timothy. And it's great when we can look at our young people and our older ones and say, isn't it great that you're still faithful, that you're still serving God? Because many of them have gone through hard times and difficult times. And it's easy to live the Christian life when things are going our way, when things are looking up. But it's when that darkness comes. And not only we need the light, but others need the light as well to be able to see spiritually. Okay, we've gone through Timothy. What about any questions, comments?
I guess before we get even further from the illustration you made about your flashlights, do you have a favorite one?
Do I have a favorite flashlight? When I was in the military, everybody wanted to carry a mag light because not only did it have a light, but it was heavy enough that you needed to use it as a weapon. You could use it as a weapon.
You asked that because, you say you have a lot. You have one or two you go back to often. As people, we tend to compare ourselves to others, saying, well, I'm not as good as this person, or at least I'm better than that person. Neither one of those are necessarily good attitudes. The thing we need to remember is that even a weak flashlight, if you want to use that term, is a whole lot better than nothing.
Right.
So however we tend to see ourselves, as long as we're still working, we serve a purpose.
Yeah. And there are a variety of uses of lights. If you're into photography, you know that there are beauty lights, ring lights, different things like that. If you want to hunt illegally, you can go out at night with these big spotlights. We have can lights, we have whatever these lights are called, we have exit lights, and they all serve different purposes as far as what they do. And so that would make an application as well, that each of us, while we may serve a different purpose, are needful and necessary.
Jeremy makes mention of the weak light is still doing something, and I totally understand that illustration and that point. I think we have to be very careful not to limit ourselves or to think that because of our physical limitations or whatever we have in our past that we don't allow God's power to work in us. Anderson's got a light. My aunts bought it for him. They were scared. They actually took it off the list and said, we don't want to get him that because it says you have to be careful, you might light things on fire. Well, I found out, I said, put it back on the list. Of course he wants to light
Yeah,
things on fire.
I saw him use it.
That's what kids do. And I trust him not to burn our house down, and he hasn't so far. But the point is, Paul was that type of light, wasn't he? He was the kind of guy that was lighting fires in people because of how bright his light was. And we need to aspire to be that kind of light. We don't ever need to accept anything less than that in our lives.
I think it's important to confirm that what Jeremy is saying is basically allowing fear and anxiety and trepidation to keep us from doing something that we're being challenged with, maybe by another person or God, that we fail to recognize the opportunities that we have in front of us to step
Right.
up and do more.
That's what happened to the one talent man. He got scared.
And to use the illustration, we're more likely to do things when it's daylight as far as working, other things, than at nighttime because we may not be able to see what we're doing. So we want that light so that we can be able to see.
To redirect just a little bit what I said earlier, I wasn't necessarily saying we should be content if we perceive ourselves that way. What I was trying to say is sometimes we don't see the importance we have in the place that we are. Because I may think that I'm not shining as brightly as I ought to be. But for somebody lost in the dark, I'm still being a beacon. They know where to come to be pointed in the right way. Even though I may not think I'm doing the job well enough, I'm saving somebody else's life.
Right. During night maneuvers in basic training, they used the illustration. We were sitting in the stands, and if I remember right, it was at least a mile and maybe even 2 miles away. Somebody lit up a cigarette. And from that distance, you could see it. To them, it probably wasn't much, but you could still see that light as far as if it was for direction or whatever the case may be. Epaphroditus, hard name, but yet so much good is said about him. On the next page, 65, we just want to emphasize, consequently, Paul described Epaphroditus in these ways. Listen, he's my brother. All of us, if we are part of the body of Christ, are brothers and sisters. If we've obeyed the gospel, we become part of that family and we're brothers and sisters. Now that doesn't mean that a brother or sister can't become unfaithful. But here he's speaking from the standpoint of Epaphroditus being faithful in what he's doing. He says, he's my brother. Number 2, he's my fellow worker. Now, from our illustration about lights, fellow workers means you not only have one light, but you have 2 lights. At night, you've been driving down the road. You can probably tell the difference of when one headlight works or when both of them work. He's my fellow worker. We've joined hands together and we're trying to accomplish good for Christ. Third, he's my fellow soldier. I get to use a lot of military illustrations. As a dog handler, our responsibility was to walk outside the perimeter of where nuclear weapons were stored. Only once or twice did they call an actual alert of where they thought somebody was seen. Well, guess who gets to go first? Dog handlers. I walked all the way as far as I was supposed to go. And when I got to the end, I realized there was nobody behind me going with me. I don't know why they weren't there. There were supposed to be a number of security folks. Because if my dog had alerted or said there's somebody out there, I carried a .45, had a magazine of 7 rounds and 2 other clips, so I had 21 rounds. Wouldn't have gone very far in trying to defend nuclear material. Paul says, here's somebody who's standing by me as a fellow soldier. We need people like that. He then says, he's your messenger. Pull that back up right quick. He's the one going back and forth, whether it's deliverance of these letters or whether it is that he's taking financial aid. He's part of them. Last, he says, he ministered to my need. He points out that Epaphroditus didn't take a trip from Philippi to Rome for a vacation. He had a certain thing to do. And like Timothy has earlier been shown to be proven, Epaphroditus is also being proven. How is Epaphroditus physically? He's sick. Doesn't tell us what he's facing, other than the fact that he's to the point of death at times. Question. Was Paul able to heal people of disease? But yet it's not for Epaphroditus. He couldn't heal himself of his own thorn in the flesh. He didn't heal this man, or God didn't allow it to happen. He had to live with whatever he was facing. Miracles don't happen today. God has blessed us with such modern medical technology, though, that makes life much, much better than it has been in recent past. But even with the great medical technology, people still have to live with a lot of difficulties. Maybe he's telling us, well, like Epaphroditus, let his light shine, that regardless of his physical, he was still going to do what he could, not use it as an excuse. The bell has rung. Any comments about Epaphroditus? Started to ask, does anybody want to pronounce his name? All right, appreciate it much. We'll move on to the next lesson.